I was sitting at my kitchen table in my suburban Phoenix, Arizona home when I heard the sickening crunch of metal against wood, followed by the unmistakable sound of splintering timber. My coffee mug froze halfway to my lips as I processed what I'd just heard. The noise had come from the front of my house, right where my mailbox stood at the edge of my driveway. I jumped up from my chair, nearly knocking it over, and rushed to the front window. What I saw made my blood run cold. A silver Mercedes SUV was reversing away from the remains of my mailbox, which now lay in pieces across my lawn and the street. The vehicle didn't stop. It didn't even slow down significantly. The driver simply backed up, turned the wheel, and started to drive away as if nothing had happened. I sprinted to my front door, yanking it open so hard I thought I might pull it off its hinges. The morning Arizona sun hit me like a wall as I ran out onto my porch. "Hey, stop!" I shouted, waving my arms. "You just hit my mailbox." The Mercedes brake lights flashed red, and the vehicle came to a halt about 50 feet down Saguaro Ridge Drive. My heart was pounding as I walked quickly toward the car, trying to memorize the license plate just in case. The driver's side door opened, and out stepped a woman I recognized immediately. Patricia Thornton, the vice president of the Saguaro Estates Homeowners Association, and quite possibly the most insufferable person I'd had the misfortune of dealing with since moving here 6 months ago. She was in her early 50s, with an aggressive blonde bob that looked like it cost more than my monthly grocery budget. And she wore designer athleisure clothing that probably had never seen the inside of a gym. Her oversized sunglasses covered half her face, and her expression, what I could see of it, was one of supreme annoyance, as if I had somehow inconvenienced her by having my mailbox in her way. "Patricia," I said, trying to keep my voice level, "you just destroyed my mailbox." She looked back at the wreckage, then at me, and let out a long, theatrical sigh. "Ian, honestly, I barely touched it. That mailbox was clearly not properly installed. It just fell over." I stared at her in disbelief. "It didn't fall over. You backed into it. I heard the whole thing from inside my house, and I saw you driving away." "I was simply leaving the neighborhood after my morning inspection," she said, adjusting her sunglasses. "These streets are far too narrow, which is something I've been trying to address with the HOA board. Your mailbox was jutting out into the street in a manner that's probably not even compliant with our community guidelines." "My mailbox was exactly where it's supposed to be," I said, feeling my jaw clench. "And you just hit it and tried to drive away." Patricia waved her hand dismissively, her multiple bracelets jingling. "I don't have time for this drama, Ian. I have a HOA board meeting in an hour. If your mailbox was damaged, that's between you and your insurance company. Now, if you'll excuse me." She started to turn back toward her car, and I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Are you serious right now? You're not even going to give me your insurance information." "Why would I do that?" she asked, pausing with her hand on the car door. "I didn't do anything wrong." "Your improperly maintained mailbox created a hazard. There were pieces of your car left at the scene," I shouted, pointing at some silver plastic fragments near the mailbox debris. "I saw the whole thing happen." Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line. "Lower your voice, Ian. You're causing a scene in our peaceful community. This kind of aggressive behavior is exactly why we have HOA rules about maintaining neighborhood harmony." I took a deep breath, trying to control my temper. "Patricia, you hit my mailbox. I'm asking you, as a neighbor, to provide your insurance information so we can handle this the right way. And I'm telling you, as an HOA officer, that I did no such thing," she replied coldly. "Perhaps you should review Section 7 of the HOA covenants regarding exterior structure maintenance." I suspect you'll find that your mailbox installation was not up to code. Good day, Ian." She got into her Mercedes and drove away, leaving me standing in the middle of the street, staring after her in complete shock. I couldn't believe what had just happened. I'd witnessed her hit my mailbox, confronted her immediately, and she'd not only denied responsibility but somehow tried to make it my fault. I walked back to survey the damage. My mailbox wasn't just damaged, it was completely destroyed. The wooden post had splintered at the base, and the metal mailbox itself was bent and crushed. The whole structure would need to be replaced. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures from every angle, making sure to capture the silver paint transfer on the mailbox, the tire marks on my lawn, and the plastic fragments that had clearly come from Patricia's vehicle. My hands were shaking as I crouched down to examine the debris more closely. I'd moved to Saguaro Estates because it seemed like a nice, quiet neighborhood in the Scottsdale area. The houses were well maintained, the community had decent amenities, and the price was right. But in the 6 months I'd lived here, I'd quickly learned that the Saguaro Estates, HOA, and Patricia Thornton in particular, ran the neighborhood like a fiefdom. I'd already received 3 violation notices in my first 6 months. The first was for leaving my trash cans visible from the street for more than 12 hours after pickup day. Never mind that the garbage truck had come late that week. The second was for having a lawn that exceeded the maximum allowed grass height by ½ an inch, measured, according to Patricia's letter, with a ruler during one of her routine inspections. The third was for parking my work truck in my driveway overnight, which apparently violated some obscure rule about commercial vehicles, even though my truck was just a regular pickup with my plumbing company's phone number on the side. Each violation came with a $50 fine and a condescending letter about maintaining community standards. I'd paid the fines to avoid escalation, but it had left a bitter taste in my mouth. And now this. Now Patricia had literally destroyed my property and was trying to pretend it hadn't happened. I gathered up some of the larger pieces of my mailbox and carried them to my garage. My neighbor from across the street, old Mr. Peterson, was out getting his newspaper and had witnessed the aftermath. "Saw the whole thing from my window," he called over. "That Thornton woman backed right into it, didn't even look where she was going. You saw it?" I asked, feeling a surge of relief that I had a witness. "Clear as day," he confirmed, walking closer. "She was on her phone, not paying attention. Backed right out of the Hendersons' driveway across the street and swung too wide. Never even hit her brakes until after the impact." "Would you be willing to give a statement if needed?" I asked. "She's denying the whole thing." Mr. Peterson's face darkened. "That woman has been a thorn in this neighborhood's side for years. I'll gladly tell anyone who asks what I saw. Got into it with her myself last year when she tried to fine me for my rose bushes being the wrong shade of pink." "The wrong shade?" I asked incredulously. "Said they violated the aesthetic consistency guidelines or some nonsense," he said, shaking his head. "Told her where she could stick her guidelines. My wife planted those roses 30 years ago before there even was an HOA. Patricia backed down when I threatened to lawyer up, but she's had it out for me ever since. We exchanged phone numbers, and I thanked him for his willingness to help. Back inside my house, I sat down at my computer and started documenting everything. I typed up a detailed account of the incident, including the exact time, what I'd heard and seen, and Patricia's response when I'd confronted her. I uploaded all my photos to a folder on my computer and backed them up to cloud storage. Then I looked up Patricia's information. As vice president of the HOA, her contact details were listed on the community website. I found the HOA president's information too. His name was Robert Carmichael, and according to the website, he'd been president for the past 8 years. I decided to call him first, hoping that perhaps he'd be more reasonable than Patricia. The phone rang 4 times before a gruff voice answered. Carmichael. Mr. Carmichael, my name is Ian Walker. I live at 4247 Saguaro Ridge Drive. I'm calling about an incident that just happened involving Patricia Thornton. There was a pause. What kind of incident? I explained the situation, keeping my tone professional and factual. I described how Patricia had backed into my mailbox, how I'd confronted her immediately, and how she'd denied responsibility and driven away when I finished. There was another long pause. Ian, I'm going to be straight with you. Patricia Thornton is a valued member of our HOA board. She dedicates countless hours to keeping this community in excellent condition. If she says she didn't hit your mailbox, then I'm inclined to believe her. But I saw her do it, I said, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. And I have a witness, my neighbor, Mr. Peterson. Peterson, Carmichael said, and I could hear the dismissiveness in his voice. He's been at odds with the HOA for years. I wouldn't consider him a reliable witness. Look, Ian, accidents happen. Sometimes mailboxes get damaged. But making accusations against board members isn't going to help your standing in this community. I'm not making accusations, I said, my patience wearing thin. I'm reporting a fact. She hit my mailbox, and she needs to take responsibility for it. If you feel that strongly about it, you're welcome to file a police report, Carmichael said. But I'm telling you right now, as HOA president, that we stand behind Patricia 100%. This conversation is over. He hung up before I could respond. I sat there holding the phone, unable to believe how this day was going. Not only had Patricia destroyed my property and refused to take responsibility, but the HOA president was circling the wagons to protect her. Fine. If they wanted to play it that way, I'd file a police report. I called the non-emergency line for the Scottsdale Police Department and explained the situation. The dispatcher told me they'd send an officer out to take a report. While I waited, I called my insurance company to report the damage. The claims representative I spoke to was sympathetic, but explained that since I only had liability coverage on my homeowner's policy, damage to my mailbox would only be covered if I could identify the responsible party and get their insurance information, or if I wanted to pay out of pocket and pursue reimbursement through small claims court later. What if the other party refuses to provide insurance information? I asked. Then you'd need to pursue them through legal channels, the representative said. We can't force someone to file a claim if they're denying responsibility. You could pay for the repairs yourself and then take them to small claims court for reimbursement. It wasn't the answer I wanted, but it wasn't unexpected. I thanked her and hung up just as a Scottsdale police cruiser pulled up in front of my house. The officer who got out was a young guy, probably in his late 20s, with a professional demeanor. His name tag read Martinez. Mr. Walker, he asked as he approached. That's me, I said, walking out to meet him. Thanks for coming. Officer Martinez examined the destroyed mailbox, took photos of his own, and listened as I walked him through exactly what had happened. He took notes and collected the plastic fragments that had come from Patricia's car, placing them in evidence bags. And you confronted the driver immediately after the incident, he asked. Yes, sir. She stopped when I yelled and I asked her for her insurance information. She refused and claimed she hadn't hit the mailbox. Did you see damage to her vehicle? I saw paint transfer and some scratching on her rear bumper, I said. I can show you on the photos I took. I pulled up the pictures on my phone. In one of them, you could clearly see the back of Patricia's Mercedes, and if you zoomed in, there was visible damage to the bumper area and a scrape along the side panel. "And you have a witness?" Martinez asked. "Yes, my neighbor, Mr. Peterson. He saw the whole thing from his window. I have his phone number if you need to talk to him." Officer Martinez walked across the street and spoke with Mr. Peterson for about 10 minutes. I could see the older man gesturing animatedly, clearly giving a detailed account. When Martinez came back, he seemed satisfied. "Your neighbor corroborates your version of events," he said. "I'm going to go speak with Miss Thornton now. What's her address?" I gave him Patricia's address, which was on the next street over, Ocotillo Lane. "She mentioned she had an HOA board meeting," I added. "She might not be home." "I'll try there first," Martinez said. "Wait here. I'll be back." He drove off, and I went back inside to wait. 20 minutes later he returned, and his expression told me the conversation hadn't gone well. "Miss Thornton denies hitting your mailbox," he said. "She claims she was in the area this morning but didn't have any contact with your property. She showed me her vehicle, and while there is some damage to the rear bumper, she claims that was from a previous incident in a parking lot." "That's complete garbage," I said. "The damage is fresh, and there are paint fragments from her car at the scene." "I understand your frustration," Martinez said. "And for what it's worth, based on the physical evidence and the witness statement, I believe your version of events. However, this is ultimately a civil matter. I can issue a report, which you can use for insurance purposes or in civil court, but I can't compel her to provide insurance information if she's denying involvement." "So she can just lie and get away with it?" I asked. "You have options," he said. "You can take her to small claims court. You can also contact your homeowner's insurance to see if they'll pursue the claim on your behalf. The police report will document the incident and the evidence. The plastic fragments we collected might be able to be matched to her vehicle type if it comes to that." He handed me a case number and a copy of the incident report. "I'm sorry I can't do more. Property damage without injury and where the other party denies fault usually ends up being a civil issue." After Martinez left, I sat on my porch steps and stared at the ruins of my mailbox. I was going to have to replace it out of my own pocket, and then I was going to have to sue Patricia Thornton in small claims court to get my money back. The whole thing was absurd. I spent the rest of the day getting quotes for mailbox replacement. The destroyed one had been a nice wooden post with a large metal mailbox, and replacing it was going to cost about $400 for materials and installation. I decided to handle the installation myself to save money, so I bought the materials that afternoon and spent the next few hours digging out the old post base and installing the new one. By the time the sun was setting, I had a new mailbox installed. It looked good, maybe even better than the old one, but I was out $400 and a full day of work I'd had to cancel. As a self-employed plumber, every day I didn't work was income I lost. The whole incident had probably cost me closer to $700 when I factored in lost wages. I was cleaning up the last of the debris when a car pulled into my driveway. It wasn't a car I recognized. A woman in her mid-40s got out, wearing business casual attire and carrying a folder. She had an official-looking demeanor that immediately put me on guard. "Ian Walker?" she asked. "Yes. My name is Denise Kowalski. I'm with the Saguaro Estates HOA management company. I need to speak with you about a complaint that's been filed." "A complaint?" I asked, confused. "What kind of complaint?" She opened her folder and pulled out a document. "We've received a report that you verbally harassed and threatened an HOA board member this morning. According to the complaint, you approached Patricia Thornton in an aggressive manner, yelled at her in the street, and made threatening statements." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "That's not what happened at all. Patricia backed into my mailbox and tried to drive away. I simply asked her for her insurance information. "The complaint states that you were hostile and aggressive," Denise said, her tone neutral but firm. "The HOA takes allegations of harassment very seriously. We're issuing you an official warning. Any further incidents of this nature could result in fines or legal action." "This is unbelievable," I said, my voice rising. "Patricia destroyed my property, refused to take responsibility, and now she's filing a complaint against me." "I'm just here to deliver the warning," Denise said, handing me the document. "You have the right to dispute this at the next HOA board meeting if you'd like. That will be held 2 weeks from today, on the 27th. She got back in her car and left before I could say anything else. I looked down at the warning letter. It was officially drafted, with the HOA letterhead and everything. According to the document, I was being accused of aggressive behavior toward HOA officials and creating a disturbance in the community. If I received 2 more warnings, I could be fined up to $500 per incident. I went inside and poured myself a drink. This whole situation had spiraled out of control in less than 12 hours. Not only had Patricia destroyed my mailbox and refused to pay for it, but she was now actively trying to paint me as the aggressor. The HOA president had made it clear he was backing her, and now the management company was involved too. I spent that evening researching my options. Small claims court in Arizona had a limit of $3,500, which was more than enough for what I needed. The filing fee was relatively small, and I could represent myself. I'd have to serve Patricia with the court papers, present my evidence at a hearing, and hope the judge saw through her lies. I also looked into HOA laws in Arizona. I learned that HOAs had significant power, but they also had to operate within certain legal boundaries. They couldn't just make arbitrary rules or enforce them selectively. If I was going to fight this, I needed to understand my rights. The next morning, I went to the small claims court office and filed a lawsuit against Patricia Thornton for $400 in property damage plus $250 in lost wages, totaling $650. The clerk processed my paperwork and gave me instructions on how to serve Patricia with the court summons. I hired a process server to deliver the summons to Patricia, which cost me another $50. The server reported back that he'd handed the documents to her personally at her home, and she'd been visibly angry when she realized what they were. 3 days after I filed the lawsuit, I received a letter in the mail. It was from the Saguaro Estates HOA, and it was on official letterhead. My hands were actually shaking as I opened it. The letter stated that the HOA had conducted an inspection of my property and found multiple violations. First, my mailbox was not the correct style according to the architectural guidelines. It needed to be replaced with an approved model within 14 days or I'd face fines. Second, my lawn had visible damage from vehicle tire tracks, which violated the landscaping standards. I needed to repair and reseed the damaged area within 30 days. Third, I had stored construction materials. The debris from the old mailbox, visible from the street for more than 24 hours, which violated the community appearance standards. Each violation came with a $50 fine, $150 total. And if I didn't correct the violations within the stated time frames, the fines would increase to $100 per day per violation. The letter was signed by Patricia Thornton, Vice President, and Robert Carmichael, President. I couldn't believe what I was reading. The mailbox I just installed was nearly identical to the old one and matched every other mailbox on my street. The lawn damage had been caused by Patricia's car when she hit my mailbox. and the construction materials had been the destroyed mailbox, which I'd cleaned up the same day it was damaged. This was retaliation, pure and simple. Patricia was using her position in the HOA to harass me because I'd had the audacity to hold her accountable for damaging my property. I took photos of my new mailbox and photos of all my neighbors' mailboxes, which looked exactly the same. I took photos of my lawn, which I'd already reseeded. I documented everything because I had a feeling this was just the beginning. The next week, I received another letter. This one informed me that I was being fined an additional $100 for failure to attend a mandatory compliance meeting. I'd never been informed of any such meeting. When I called the HOA management company to ask about it, I was told that the meeting notice had been posted on the community website and that it was my responsibility to check it regularly. I was now up to $250 in HOA fines, plus the $400 for the mailbox replacement, plus the $50 for the process server, plus lost wages. Patricia's little hit and run was costing me over $1,000. My small claims court date was set for 6 weeks out. In the meantime, I decided to fight the HOA fines. I wrote a detailed letter to the board, complete with photos and evidence, disputing each violation. I pointed out that my mailbox matched all the neighbors' mailboxes, that the lawn damage was caused by Patricia's negligence, and that I'd cleaned up the debris within hours of the incident. I also noted that I'd never received notice of any compliance meeting. The response I got back was brief and unsympathetic. The board had reviewed my dispute and denied it. All fines stood. I had 14 days to pay or the fines would increase, and a lien could be placed on my property. A lien on my property. Over made-up violations that were clearly retaliation. I was furious. I decided to attend the next HOA board meeting. According to the community bylaws, meetings were open to all homeowners, and there was a public comment period. I wanted to address the board directly and put Patricia on the spot in front of other homeowners. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse on a Tuesday evening. When I arrived, there were about 15 other homeowners scattered around the room, most of them older residents who looked like they'd been attending these meetings for years. The board sat at a table at the front of the room. Patricia was there, looking smug, along with Robert Carmichael and 3 other board members I didn't recognize. The meeting started with standard business, approving minutes from the last meeting and discussing community finances. It was dry and boring, and I could see why most homeowners didn't bother attending. But I sat through it all, waiting for the public comment period. Finally, after nearly an hour, Carmichael announced that they'd moved to public comments. Each speaker has 3 minutes. Please state your name and address for the record. I stood up, my heart pounding. Ian Walker, 4247 Saguaro Ridge Drive. Patricia's expression immediately hardened when she saw me. I'm here to address what I believe is retaliatory enforcement of HOA rules, I began. 2 weeks ago, Patricia Thornton backed into my mailbox and destroyed it. I witnessed the incident, I confronted her immediately, and I have a neighbor who also witnessed it. She refused to provide insurance information and denied responsibility. That's a lie, Patricia interrupted. Mr. Carmichael, do I have to sit here and listen to this slander? Let him finish, Carmichael said, though his tone suggested he wasn't happy about it. I filed a police report and have since filed a small claims lawsuit, I continued. Since then, I've received multiple violation notices for issues that either don't exist or were directly caused by Miss Thornton's actions. I've been fined for having the wrong mailbox, even though my mailbox is identical to every other mailbox on my street. I've been fined for lawn damage that was caused when Miss Thornton drove across my yard. And I've been fined for missing a meeting I was never properly notified about. This is clearly retaliation for daring to hold a board member accountable. Several other homeowners were nodding, and I could see I wasn't the only one who'd had issues with Patricia. "Are you finished?" Carmichael asked coldly. "I'm asking the board to rescind these fines and to address the conflict of interest inherent in having Miss Thornton involved in any decisions regarding my property," I said. Patricia stood up, her face flushed with anger. "This is exactly the kind of hostile behavior I was talking about. Mr. Walker has been harassing me for weeks. He's making false accusations and disrupting the community. I move that we ban him from future HOA meetings for creating a hostile environment." "Second," said one of the other board members immediately. "Wait," I said. "You can't just all in favor," Carmichael asked. 4 hands went up. Only one board member, a woman named Linda, abstained. Motion passes. "Mr. Walker, you're banned from attending HOA meetings for the next 6 months. If you violate this ban, we'll pursue legal action. This meeting is adjourned." I stood there in shock as the board members gathered their papers and started to leave. A few of the other homeowners came up to me. "They did the same thing to me last year," one man said quietly. "Patricia doesn't like being questioned. I eventually just paid the fines and kept my head down. It's not worth the fight." I had to replace my entire front yard landscaping because Patricia decided my plants weren't on the approved list, a woman added. "Cost me thousands. My lawyer said fighting the HOA would cost more than just complying." As I left the clubhouse, I felt defeated but also more determined than ever. Patricia and her cronies thought they could bully me into submission, but I wasn't going to back down. The next morning, I found something new in my mailbox. It was an invoice on official HOA letterhead for $1,000. My hands shook as I read it. According to the invoice, Patricia had filed an insurance claim for the mailbox incident. Her insurance company had investigated and determined that I was at fault for having an improperly positioned mailbox that created a traffic hazard. Her insurance had paid out for the damage to her vehicle, but she had a $1,000 deductible. The invoice stated that, per HOA covenants, when property damage occurs due to one homeowner's violation of community standards, that homeowner is responsible for all costs incurred by the injured party. The invoice demanded payment within 30 days. If I didn't pay, the HOA would place a lien on my property and could ultimately foreclose. I read the document 3 times, each time feeling more incredulous. Patricia had not only gotten her insurance to somehow blame me for her backing into my mailbox, but now she was demanding I pay her $1,000 deductible. The audacity was breathtaking. I immediately called a lawyer. I'd been trying to handle this myself to save money, but this had escalated beyond what I could manage alone. The lawyer I spoke with, a real estate attorney named James Morrison, listened to my story and reviewed the documents I'd received. "This is one of the most egregious cases of HOA abuse I've seen in a while," he said. "And I've seen a lot. The good news is that they've overplayed their hand. The bad news is that fighting this is going to cost you." "How much?" I asked. "My retainer is $3,000, he said. "If this goes to court, which it probably will, you're looking at anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000 in legal fees total, maybe more if they really dig in." I felt sick. I didn't have that kind of money just lying around. What if I don't fight it? "Then they'll place a lien on your property, which will accrue interest. Eventually, they could foreclose. You'd lose your home over a mailbox." "That can't be legal," I said. "HOAs have a lot of power in Arizona," Morrison explained. They can place liens for unpaid assessments and fines. Whether this particular debt is legitimate is questionable, but they can still file the lien and you'd have to fight it in court to get it removed, which means lawyer fees anyway. I thanked him and hung up. I needed to think. I couldn't afford a lawyer, but I also couldn't afford to let Patricia steal my home. I spent the next few days researching everything I could about HOA law in Arizona. I learned about the Arizona Planned Community Act, which governed HOAs. I read about homeowner rights and HOA limitations. I found several cases where homeowners had successfully fought back against abusive HOAs, but I also found plenty of cases where HOAs had won and homeowners had lost everything. My small claims court date was in 3 weeks. I decided to focus on that first. If I could get a judgment against Patricia for the mailbox damage, it would at least establish in court that she was responsible for the incident. That judgment might help with the larger fight against the HOA. I prepared my case meticulously. I organized all my photos, printed out the police report, prepared a written statement from Mr. Peterson, and created a timeline of events. I even had the plastic fragments from Patricia's car that Officer Martinez had collected, which he'd returned to me after documenting them. The night before the court hearing, I barely slept. I kept going over my arguments in my head, anticipating what Patricia might say and preparing my responses. The next morning, I arrived at the courthouse early. Small claims court was less formal than regular court, but it was still intimidating. I checked in with the clerk and took a seat in the waiting area. Patricia arrived about 10 minutes later and she wasn't alone. She'd brought a lawyer. My heart sank. You were allowed to have a lawyer in small claims court in Arizona, but it was unusual because the amounts involved typically didn't justify the expense. Patricia clearly wanted to make a statement. Her lawyer was a sharp-looking man in an expensive suit. He immediately approached me. "Mr. Walker, I'm attorney David Stevens representing Patricia Thornton. My client would like to make you a settlement offer." "I'm listening," I said, though I had a bad feeling about this. "Miss Thornton is willing to dismiss her invoice for the insurance deductible if you drop this lawsuit and pay all outstanding HOA fines," he said. "So she wants me to pay her about $250 in fines and give up on recovering my $400 for the mailbox?" I asked. "That's correct." "No deal," I said. "She destroyed my property. She needs to pay for it." Stevens shrugged. "Your choice. But I should warn you, we have evidence that will demonstrate Miss Thornton bears no responsibility for the damage to your mailbox." Before I could ask what evidence, our case was called. We entered the courtroom and the judge, a middle-aged woman named Judge Reeves, reviewed the file briefly before looking up at us. "Mr. Walker, you're alleging that Miss Thornton damaged your mailbox and you're seeking reimbursement for replacement costs and lost wages, correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," I said. "Miss Thornton, you're denying responsibility." "That's correct, Your Honor," Patricia said, standing up. Her voice was sickly sweet, completely different from her normal tone. "This has been a very stressful situation for me. Mr. Walker has been harassing me for weeks over something I didn't do." "Let's hear the evidence," Judge Reeves said. "Mr. Walker, you go first." I presented my case, walking through the timeline of events. I showed the photos of the destroyed mailbox, the paint transfer evidence, the plastic fragments, and the damage to Patricia's vehicle. I submitted the police report and Mr. Peterson's written statement. I explained how I'd confronted Patricia immediately after the incident and how she denied responsibility and driven away. Judge Reeves listened carefully, taking notes. When I finished, she turned to Patricia. "Miss Thornton, your response." Patricia's lawyer stood up. "Your Honor, We have several pieces of evidence that cast doubt on Mr. Walker's version of events. First, we have this photograph, taken by my client on the morning in question, that shows Mr. Walker's mailbox was already damaged before my client was even in the area. He handed a photo to the judge. I felt my stomach drop. I craned my neck to see it. The photo showed a mailbox that looked damaged, but I couldn't tell if it was actually mine. The angle was weird and the image quality was poor. "That's not my mailbox," I said quickly. "Or if it is, that photo was taken after she hit it, not before. The metadata on this photo shows it was taken at 7:42 a.m., the lawyer said. According to Mr. Walker's own timeline, he claims the incident occurred at approximately 8:15 a.m. "Let me see that photo more closely," Judge Reeves said. There was a long pause while she examined it. "Mr. Walker, is this your mailbox?" I looked at it again. The truth was, I couldn't be absolutely certain. The photo was taken from an angle I didn't recognize, and mailboxes in my neighborhood all looked similar. "I honestly can't say for sure, Your Honor, but I know my mailbox wasn't damaged before Patricia hit it." "We also have my client's insurance investigation report," the lawyer continued, handing over another document. "Her insurance company investigated this claim and determined that Mr. Walker's mailbox was improperly positioned, creating a traffic hazard. The damage to my client's vehicle was minor and pre-existing from a previous parking lot incident." Judge Reeves reviewed that document too. I felt like the ground was shifting under my feet. Patricia had somehow manufactured evidence and gotten her insurance company to back up her story. "Your Honor, may I respond?" I asked. "Go ahead." "The photo Miss Thornton is presenting is suspicious at best. I have no way to verify when it was actually taken or even if that's my mailbox. What I do have is my own eyewitness account, a witness statement from my neighbor who saw the entire incident, physical evidence of paint transfer and plastic fragments from her vehicle, and a police report documenting the scene immediately after the incident. Miss Thornton's insurance investigation is biased because she's the one who filed the claim. They have no incentive to find fault with their own customer. The neighbor, Mr. Peterson, is 83 years old and has documented vision problems," Patricia's lawyer said. "We questioned the reliability of his statement. He seemed perfectly coherent when he gave a statement to the police officer," I countered. Judge Reeves held up her hand. "I've heard enough. Here's my assessment. Mr. Walker, you have circumstantial evidence and witness testimony. Miss Thornton, you have a questionable photo and an insurance report. In small claims court, the burden of proof is preponderance of evidence, meaning more likely than not. Mr. Walker, the physical evidence you presented, the paint transfer and plastic fragments, are compelling. The police report, filed immediately after the incident, documents your version of events. The insurance investigation occurred later and was conducted by a company with a financial interest in denying the claim." I felt a surge of hope. "However," Judge Reeves continued, "the photo Miss Thornton presented creates reasonable doubt about the timeline. If her mailbox was already damaged, as the photo suggests, then she may not be responsible for the full extent of the damage. Mr. Walker, did you inspect your mailbox before this incident occurred?" "No, Your Honor, but I would have noticed if it was destroyed," I said. "The photo doesn't show it destroyed, just damaged," the judge noted. "Your Honor, even if there was minor prior damage, which I don't believe there was, Patricia Thornton still hit my mailbox. Multiple pieces of evidence show that. The prior damage, if it existed, would be irrelevant. Judge Reeves considered this. That's a fair point. Miss Thornton, do you deny that your vehicle made contact with Mr. Walker's mailbox on the morning in question?" Patricia looked at her lawyer, who nodded slightly. Your Honor, my client was in the area that morning, but she maintains she did not strike the mailbox. Any contact was minimal and did not cause the damage Mr. Walker is claiming. So you're saying you did make contact? The judge asked, latching onto the inconsistency. No, Your Honor, Patricia said quickly. I'm saying I didn't cause the damage. If there was any contact at all, it was so minor as to be inconsequential. So there was contact or there wasn't? Judge Reeves asked, her tone sharpening. Patricia looked flustered. I don't recall any contact, but you just suggested there might have been minimal contact. I was speaking hypothetically, Your Honor. Judge Reeves sat back in her chair. Here's what I think happened. Miss Thornton, you backed into Mr. Walker's mailbox. You may not have realized the extent of the damage, or you may have hoped no one noticed. Mr. Walker confronted you, and rather than accept responsibility, you denied fault. You then manufactured evidence to support your denial. The photo you've presented is suspicious, and the timing is convenient. The insurance investigation was conducted at your direction and unsurprisingly supports your version of events. Patricia started to object, but Judge Reeves held up her hand. However, Miss Thornton, you made a critical error. You admitted, just now, that there may have been contact. Combined with Mr. Walker's eyewitness account, his neighbor's statement, and the physical evidence, I find it more likely than not that you are responsible for the damage to Mr. Walker's mailbox. Therefore, I'm ruling in favor of Mr. Walker. You are ordered to pay him $400 for property damage and $250 for lost wages, totaling $650. You have 30 days to pay. This court is adjourned. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I'd won. Judge Reeves gathered her files and left the courtroom. Patricia turned to me, her face red with fury. This isn't over, she hissed. You have no idea what you've started. You hit my mailbox, I said calmly. All you had to do was take responsibility. You brought this on yourself. Patricia and her lawyer stormed out. I took a moment to collect myself, then left the courthouse feeling vindicated. It wasn't a huge victory, but it was something. I had a court judgment proving Patricia was responsible for the damage, but Patricia's threat echoed in my mind. This isn't over. She was right. 2 days after the court hearing, I received a new letter from the HOA. The invoice for Patricia's insurance deductible had increased to $1,500. The letter claimed that because I'd caused additional stress and legal expenses for Patricia by pursuing the lawsuit, I was now responsible for her lawyer fees as well. I also received a new set of violation notices. My house number wasn't properly visible from the street. $50 fine. My garage door had a small dent that violated appearance standards. $100 fine. My trash cans were the wrong color. $75 fine. The fines were piling up faster than I could keep track of them. I was now facing over $2,000 in HOA penalties, plus the $1,500 invoice for Patricia's deductible. I called Attorney Morrison again. They're retaliating even harder now, I told him. I won the small claims case, but they're burying me in fines and invoices. I'm not surprised, Morrison said. Vindictive HOA board members often escalate when they're challenged. You have a few options. You can pay a lawyer to fight this, which we've discussed. You can try to gather other homeowners and recall the board members, which requires getting a significant percentage of homeowners to sign a petition. Or you can document everything and file a complaint with the Arizona Department of Real Estate, which oversees HOAs. Will a complaint do anything? I asked. It might, if you can demonstrate a pattern of abuse and violation of Arizona HOA law. The department can investigate and potentially fine the HOA or force changes. But it's a slow process. What about the media? I asked. Local news loves stories about HOA abuse. Morrison paused. That's not a bad idea, actually. Public pressure can be very effective. If you can get a reporter interested, it might force the board to back down. After we hung up, I started drafting an email to every local news station in the Phoenix metro area. I laid out the entire saga, from Patricia hitting my mailbox to the retaliatory fines to the bogus invoice for her insurance deductible. I attached photos, documents, and a copy of the small claims court judgment. 3 news stations responded. 2 said they'd look into it but made no promises. 1. A reporter named Gabriella Zhang from a local ABC affiliate called me directly. "Mr. Walker, I'd like to do a story on this," she said. "HOA abuse stories resonate with viewers because a lot of people have dealt with similar issues. Would you be willing to do an on-camera interview?" "Absolutely," I said. We set up an interview for the following week. In the meantime, Gabriella said she'd reach out to Patricia and the HOA for their side of the story. The day before the interview, I got a frantic call from Robert Carmichael, the HOA president. "Mr. Walker, I understand you've been talking to the media about the HOA. That's a very unwise decision." "Why is that?" I asked. "Because it makes the entire community look bad," he said. "This is a private matter that should be resolved internally. Going to the media is inflammatory and harmful to property values." "You know what else is harmful to property values?" I said. "Having a vice president who commits hit and runs and then abuses her power to retaliate against the victim. I gave you and the board multiple chances to handle this fairly. You chose to back Patricia instead. Now the world gets to know about it. If you go through with this interview, the board will have no choice but to pursue all available legal remedies against you," Carmichael threatened. "I have a court judgment proving Patricia was at fault," I said. "And I have documentation of every retaliatory fine and violation notice. Bring it on." He hung up without another word. The next day, Gabriella and her camera crew came to my house. We did the interview on my front lawn, right next to my mailbox. I walked her through everything that had happened, showed her all the documentation, and explained how the HOA had retaliated against me for daring to hold Patricia accountable. "We reached out to Patricia Thornton and the HOA board for comment," Gabriella said on camera. "They declined to be interviewed, but sent us a statement saying that all enforcement actions were taken in accordance with HOA bylaws, and that Mr. Walker has been a problematic homeowner who repeatedly violated community standards." She turned to me. "What do you say to that?" "I'd say look at my record," I replied. "I've lived here 6 months. I had 0 violations before Patricia hit my mailbox. Since then, I've received a dozen violation notices for things like my trash cans being the wrong color and my house number not being visible enough, even though it hasn't changed since I moved in. This is textbook retaliation, and I have documentation proving it." The story aired 3 days later on the evening news. It was a 5-minute segment during the consumer advocacy portion of the broadcast. Gabriella had done an excellent job presenting the facts and making it clear that this was a case of HOA abuse. The story ended with a message encouraging other homeowners who'd experienced similar issues to come forward. The response was immediate and overwhelming. By the next morning, I'd received over 50 emails and messages from other homeowners, not just in Saguaro Estates, but across the Phoenix area, sharing their own horror stories about abusive HOAs. Several were from my own neighborhood, people who'd been quietly dealing with Patricia's reign of terror for years. More importantly, the HOA's management company called me. It was a different person this time, someone higher up the chain. Her name was Margaret Holloway, and she was the regional director. "Mr. Walker, I've seen the news story, and I've reviewed your file," she said. "I want to apologize for how this situation has been handled. The enforcement actions taken against you appear to be excessive and potentially retaliatory. I'm ordering an internal review of all violation notices issued to you, and I'm suspending all outstanding fines pending that review." "What about the invoice for Patricia's insurance deductible?" I asked. "That invoice was never approved by our company," Margaret said. "It appears to have been issued directly by the HOA board without proper authorization. We're looking into that as well. I can't make any promises, but I want you to know that we take allegations of board misconduct very seriously." It was the first reasonable conversation I'd had with anyone connected to the HOA since this whole mess started. "I appreciate that," I said, "but I'm still dealing with a board that's hostile toward me. Patricia is still vice president, and she's made it clear she's going to make my life miserable." "Board members are elected by the homeowners," Margaret said carefully. "We can't remove them, but we can report misconduct to the state. And homeowners do have the right to recall board members if they gather enough signatures." After the call, I started reaching out to the other homeowners who'd contacted me. Several of them were eager to do something about the HOA board. We organized a meeting at a local coffee shop, and 15 homeowners showed up. "Patricia Thornton has been a problem for years," one woman said. "She fined me $1,000 for planting roses that weren't on the approved plant list, even though the roses had been there for a decade before she joined the board. She tried to force me to repaint my entire house because she said the shade of beige was half a tone too dark," another man added. "Cost me $8,000. I couldn't afford to fight it." One by one, people shared their stories. A pattern emerged. Patricia targeted people she didn't like or who questioned her authority. She used the HOA rules as a weapon, interpreting them in the strictest possible way when it suited her and ignoring them when it didn't. And Robert Carmichael enabled her, backing her up no matter how unreasonable her actions were. "So what do we do?" someone asked. "We recall the board," I said. "According to the HOA bylaws, we need signatures from 20% of homeowners to trigger a recall election. There are 310 homes in Saguaro Estates, so we need 62 signatures." "I can get 10 signatures just from my street," one man said. "I'll help too," others chimed in. We divided up the neighborhood and started canvassing for signatures. It took 2 weeks, but we got 93 signatures, well over the required threshold. We submitted the recall petition to the HOA management company, and they were legally required to schedule a special election within 60 days. Patricia and Robert Carmichael were furious. They sent out a mass email to all homeowners, claiming that I was a troublemaker who was trying to destabilize the community. They accused the recall effort of being based on lies and personal vendettas. They insisted they'd done nothing wrong and were being unfairly targeted. But the damage was done. The news story had exposed them, and too many homeowners had their own stories of abuse. The special election was scheduled for 6 weeks out. In the meantime, I received a notice that Patricia had paid the small claims court judgment. $650 was deposited directly into my bank account. She hadn't apologized or acknowledged any wrongdoing, but at least I had my money back. The HOA management company also completed their review and rescinded all the violation notices and fines that had been issued to me. Margaret Holloway called to inform me personally. "We found that the violations were not properly documented and appeared to be selectively enforced," she said. "The fines have been removed from your account, and we've issued a warning to the board about proper enforcement procedures." The invoice for Patricia's insurance deductible was also formally withdrawn. Apparently, the management company had determined that it was issued without proper authority and had no legal basis. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. The financial pressure was gone, and the recall election gave me hope that real change was possible. The election campaign was intense. Patricia and Robert put up signs around the neighborhood urging people to vote no on the recall. They framed the recall as an attack on the HOA itself and claimed that removing the board would lead to chaos and declining property values. They sent out mailers with glossy photos of the community's amenities and testimonials from homeowners who supported them. But we had something more powerful: the truth. We held community meetings where people shared their experiences. We created a simple website documenting the pattern of abuse and selective enforcement. We didn't attack Patricia and Robert personally. We simply presented the facts and let homeowners draw their own conclusions. On election day, voter turnout was the highest it had been in years. Over 70% of homeowners cast ballots. When the results were announced, the recall had passed with 64% of the vote. Patricia Thornton, Robert Carmichael, and 2 other board members who'd been part of the recall petition were removed from their positions. A new election for board members was scheduled for the following month. Several reasonable, level-headed homeowners stepped up to run, including Linda, the board member who'd abstained from voting to ban me from meetings. I didn't run myself. I'd had enough of HOA politics to last a lifetime. But I campaigned for the candidates I believed in. The new board was elected with strong support. Linda became the president. One of her first actions was to conduct a comprehensive review of the HOA's enforcement practices and to implement new policies ensuring fair and consistent application of rules. She also established an appeals process for homeowners who felt they'd been unfairly fined. Patricia didn't go quietly. She threatened to sue the HOA, claiming she'd been illegally removed. Her lawyer sent several strongly worded letters, but ultimately nothing came of it. The recall had been conducted according to the bylaws, and there was no legal basis for a lawsuit. I ran into Patricia one more time about 2 months after she'd been removed from the board. I was getting my mail when she drove past. She stopped her car, rolled down her window, and glared at me. "I hope you're happy," she said. "You've destroyed this community." "No, Patricia," I replied calmly. "I held you accountable for your actions, that's all. You destroyed your own position by abusing your power." She drove off without another word. I never saw her at HOA functions again, though she still lived in the neighborhood. Life in Saguaro Estates improved dramatically under the new board. Enforcement became reasonable and consistent. Fines were issued only for legitimate violations, and homeowners were given reasonable time to correct issues. The hostile, fear-based atmosphere that Patricia had created dissipated. I got back to focusing on my business. The whole ordeal had cost me time, money, and considerable stress, but it had also taught me valuable lessons about standing up for yourself and the power of community organizing. Other homeowners thanked me regularly for taking a stand when they'd been too afraid or too worn down to do so themselves. About 6 months after the recall election, I received an unexpected call. It was from a lawyer representing Patricia Thornton, but not about the HOA situation. Patricia was being sued by another resident of a different neighborhood for a hit-and-run incident. The lawyer had heard about my case and wanted to know if I'd be willing to provide testimony about Patricia's pattern of behavior. "She did it again?" I asked, stunned. "Apparently," the lawyer said. "She backed into someone's car in a grocery store parking lot and drove away. There was surveillance footage. When confronted, she denied it was her, but the footage clearly shows her license plate. The victim wants to pursue criminal charges for leaving the scene of an accident. I agreed to provide a statement. A few weeks later, I learned that Patricia had been charged with hit and run, a misdemeanor in Arizona. She ended up pleading guilty and received probation, a fine, and a suspended license for 6 months. It turned out my case had established a pattern that made it harder for her to claim the second incident was a misunderstanding. Justice had finally caught up with her, not just for what she'd done to me, but for her broader pattern of irresponsible and illegal behavior. As for me, I settled into life in Saguaro Estates. My business was doing well, and I'd made genuine friends among my neighbors. The community became what it should have been all along, a place where people looked out for each other rather than living in fear of petty tyrants with too much power and too little accountability. The Mailbox incident seemed like ancient history, but I never forgot the lessons it taught me. Stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Document everything. Don't let bullies intimidate you into silence. And most importantly, when people show you who they are, believe them. My mailbox, the replacement I'd installed with my own hands, still stood at the end of my driveway. It was a daily reminder of how a simple incident had spiraled into a months-long battle, but also of how perseverance and principle could triumph over abuse of power. The new HOA board even passed a resolution formally apologizing to homeowners who'd been subjected to unfair enforcement under the previous board. It didn't erase what had happened, but it was a meaningful acknowledgement and a commitment to do better going forward. I occasionally wondered if Patricia had learned anything from the experience, but I doubted it. People like her rarely do. They see themselves as victims of unfair persecution rather than architects of their own downfall. But that wasn't my problem anymore. She'd been held accountable, removed from power, and even faced criminal consequences for her actions. That was as much justice as I could reasonably expect. One evening, about a year after the whole mess began, I was sitting on my front porch watching the sunset paint the Arizona sky in shades of orange and purple. Mr. Peterson, my elderly neighbor who'd witnessed the original Mailbox incident, walked over with a cold beer in his hand. "Thought you might like one of these," he said, handing it to me. "Thanks," I said, accepting it gratefully. He settled into the chair next to me with a satisfied sigh. "You know, this neighborhood is the best it's been in 10 years. People actually say hello to each other now. There's no fear hanging over everything." "It shouldn't have taken what it took," I said. "No, it shouldn't have," he agreed. "But most people, they don't want to rock the boat. They figure it's easier to just go along. You didn't do that. You stood up when it mattered." "I just wanted her to pay for my mailbox," I said with a wry smile. "It was never just about the mailbox," Peterson said. "It was about whether someone with power could abuse it without consequence. You made sure the answer was no. That matters." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky darken and the first stars appear. The neighborhood was quiet, peaceful. Kids were playing in a yard down the street. A couple was walking their dog. Normal, everyday life in a suburban community. It was exactly what it should be, and it had taken a destroyed mailbox and a year of fighting to get here. But it was worth it. The invoice that Patricia had sent demanding her insurance deductible, the one that had threatened to put a lien on my home, was framed and hanging in my garage. I kept it as a reminder of how far someone was willing to go to avoid accepting responsibility for their actions. But I also kept it as a trophy. Every time I saw it, I remembered that I'd won. Not just the small claims case, not just the recall election, but the bigger battle for accountability and fairness. Life moved on. The seasons changed. I continued to build my plumbing business and became more involved in the community. I even joined a committee to revise the HOA bylaws, to include better protections against abuse of power and clearer procedures for homeowners, to challenge unfair enforcement. Patricia eventually moved away from Saguaro Estates. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she'd sold her house and relocated to Nevada. Whether she left because of the shame of being recalled or simply wanted a fresh start, I didn't know and didn't particularly care. She was gone, and that was enough. The new mailbox I'd installed held up perfectly through monsoon seasons, windstorms, and the brutal Arizona summer heat. It was sturdy, well built, and positioned exactly where it should be. Nobody ever hit it again. Sometimes I thought about how differently things could have gone. If Patricia had simply apologized that first day and provided her insurance information, none of the rest would have happened. The whole saga, from the court battle to the recall election to her eventual criminal charges, all of it stemmed from her refusal to accept responsibility for backing into a mailbox. It was almost funny, in a dark way. A mailbox had been her downfall. Not her years of petty tyranny as an HOA board member, not the countless other homeowners she'd harassed and fined unreasonably. A mailbox, but that's how it works sometimes. It's not the big things that catch people. It's the small things where they get careless, where they think it doesn't matter, where they assume they can get away with it one more time. Patricia had gotten away with abusing her power for years because people were afraid to stand up to her. She thought she could get away with hitting my mailbox and denying it because that's what had always worked before. She was wrong. As I sat on my porch that evening with Mr. Peterson, finishing my beer and watching the stars come out, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Not because I'd destroyed someone or gotten revenge, but because I'd stood up for what was right and, with the help of my neighbors, made things better. The community of Saguaro Estates was stronger now. The HOA functioned as it should, helping maintain property values and community standards without terrorizing homeowners. People felt safe in their own homes, not worried that some petty violation would result in crushing fines. And my mailbox, that simple wooden post with a metal box attached, stood as a monument to the principle that power without accountability is tyranny, no matter how small the domain. I raised my beer bottle in a silent toast to that mailbox, to Mr. Peterson for being a witness when it mattered, to Attorney Morrison for his advice even though I couldn't afford to hire him, to Gabriella Zhang for telling my story, and to all the neighbors who'd signed the recall petition and voted for change. But most of all, I toasted to the principle that doing the right thing, even when it's hard, even when it's expensive, even when it seems impossible, is always worth it in the end. The mailbox incident had cost me over $1,000, countless hours of stress and work, and nearly my home. But it had also brought about real, meaningful change for an entire community. When I looked at it that way, it seemed like a bargain. As the night settled in and the desert air finally cooled, I went inside, content with how things had turned out. Tomorrow I'd go back to work, to the normal routine of life. But I'd always remember the year I went to war with an HOA over a mailbox and won. And every time I checked my mail, I'd smile, knowing that sometimes the smallest things can lead to the biggest changes, and that standing up to bullies, even when they have institutional power behind them, is not just possible but necessary. The story of Patricia Thornton and the mailbox became something of a legend in Saguaro Estates. New homeowners heard about it, usually with some embellishment, and it served as a reminder that the current board was different, accountable, and responsive to the community. Years later, people would still point to my house when giving tours of the neighborhood. "That's where the Great Mailbox Rebellion started," they'd say, usually with a laugh. But underneath, the humor was respect. Respect for standing up, for not backing down, and for making sure that in at least one small corner of the world, justice prevailed. And that, in the end, was all I'd ever wanted. Justice for a destroyed mailbox, accountability for someone who'd abused their power, and a community where people could live without fear of petty tyrants. Simple things, really. Basic things, but worth fighting for nonetheless. The sun set completely. The Arizona sky turned black and filled with stars, and I locked my door for the night, grateful for the peace that had been so hard won, and confident that it would last because people now knew they had the power to demand it. The mailbox stood sentinel at the end of my driveway, a silent witness to everything that had transpired, and a symbol of the fact that sometimes the smallest injustices, if left unchallenged, can grow into the biggest tyrannies. But challenged, confronted, and defeated, they become stepping stones to something better. And that was worth more than any mailbox, any amount of money, or any amount of stress. That was worth everything.